Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show.
A recent report by Environmental Defence says Canada is unable to achieve its goal to eliminate plastic packaging waste by 2030 without substantial efforts by governments at all levels. To tell us more about the report and its findings is Karen Wirsig, Plastics Program Manager for Environmental Defence. She joins us from Toronto. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here. Let's start by asking, I think, the obvious question here. With a target set by the federal government for 8 years from now, why are we going to be unable to meet that target?
Well, frankly, the target's been set by all ministers of the environment across Canada, including the provinces and territories, as well as the federal government. And I think the problem is we're relying far too much on recycling and not enough on reducing the amount of waste that we produce in the first place, which means in the packaging world, cutting down on packaging that's throwaway, single-use plastic packaging in particular, and focusing on where we don't need it, stop using it, and where we can reuse packaging, we should be doing that.
Now, your report, Recycling Failure, also points out provincial policies on plastics pollution can't be relied on to meet that target. Now, is this simply a problem over the lack of coordination by the federal government and provinces?
No, really, I think it's a fact that we cannot address plastic pollution by waiting until it becomes waste and pretending that we can collect it all and recycle it and keep it out of nature and landfills and incinerators. That just doesn't work. We've had decades of trying to recycle plastic. It's not an effective strategy. For most plastics, they can't be recycled. So really the solution here is to reduce we focused on packaging. The problem of plastic pollution goes beyond packaging. We focused on packaging just to look at policies. It generates about half of all plastic waste in Canada and is probably the subject of the most policies already by the provinces and the federal government. But even then, we'll still have up to 2 million tons of plastic waste in 2030 if we keep going the way we're going today.
Is that one of the biggest myths out there, that if it's plastic, we put it in our blue bin and it'll get recycled? Is that just the biggest myth?
Well, it's what we like to call wish cycling. The plastic that's most likely to get recycled is the rigid stuff, like think of bottles, the bottles that you might get detergent in, or, frankly, beverages. Those are the most likely to be recycled. But even then, it's best if they're clear or white in color. So a lot of plastic, there's not much of a market for recycled plastic because it's so expensive. It's more to collect it and recycle it. It's cheaper, frankly, to just use virgin plastic, which is largely made out of oil and gas. And as we know from all the climate discussions, oil and gas continues to be well subsidized. All the infrastructure for oil and gas is well subsidized. So what we call virgin new plastic is cheaper and easier in some ways than relying on recycled plastic. And so that's why it's a tough sell. So certain things are recycled. We shouldn't stop using our recycling bins for sure, but we just cannot rely on that as a solution to get to zero plastic waste.
Right off the top, you mentioned that, the policies, it's not just the feds, it's environment ministers right across the province, or the provinces rather, right across the country. Are there any provinces that are doing well or better than the rest on plastics pollution?
Well, we did a report card of all the provinces and territories, and unfortunately, almost all of them failed. The one that got an average mark, let's say, or not average for the provinces, but what we might consider an average mark, is British Columbia, which got a C. That's the highest mark. And I think the reason British Columbia is doing better than others is that it really does take producer responsibility seriously. And when I say that, I mean the people who produce and sell us plastic are responsible, at least for the stuff used in households, the stuff we buy in our households and throw away. They're at least responsible for collecting it and are expected to recycle it at the end of life. So, British Columbia does have better systems in place to collect household plastics and ensure that they are recycled where possible. But even then, British Columbia, like all provinces, is not requiring the same of plastics that are thrown away at businesses, which is frankly more than half of all plastics that are thrown away. So that's a big gaping hole. And the other thing that British Columbia does is it allows the burning of plastic for fuel to count as recycling, which is just a big no-no. We do not want to be burning plastic. It's a filthy process, but also it's not recycling. It doesn't return plastic. It doesn't return plastic back to us in that form. It becomes pollution in the air, frankly. And so what we need is real recycling, which means we collect whatever can be broken down and turned back into new plastic. We collect that back and we do that with it. And that means we're going to have to use a lot less plastic.
What do we... It may sound like a simplistic question, and maybe it's just way too vague a question, but what do we need to do to meet these targets, or at least to head in the right direction here? Because it sounds pretty dire to me that there's a lot of these plastics that we have in our daily lives that we can't manage. We can't reuse. We can't do anything with it. So inevitably, it feels like it's going to end up at landfill anyway.
Well, this is it. And I think people shouldn't feel guilty or personally responsible for this. We can't control the stuff that we need to eat. The stuff that we need to live our everyday lives is often either made out of plastic or typically wrapped in way too much plastic. And we can't control that. So this is why we're putting pressure really on governments to change how plastic is used. We're saying to the federal government, the provinces are failing. They're never going to be able to take care of this problem on their own. You've started on a good path of banning certain single-use plastics. You're going to have to continue with the bans on plastics, other plastics that will never be recycled and end up far too much in nature. We're going to have to continue banning plastics. And we're also going to have to focus on setting up systems for reuse, because right now it's too easy to create garbage. It's too easy for us to use things once and just dump it somewhere with the assumption that it will be collected and put in landfill. We need to make reusables just as easy, and there are budding services across the country for things like takeout containers and takeout beverage cups, coffee cups and pop cups. And those kind of things we need to see grow so that they're convenient and affordable for everyone.
I'm so glad you said what you said there, which is you can't just sort of get bogged down, and depressed about it and feeling like you're personally responsible, but right. Do what you can to pitch in. And I'll tell you, when the whole idea of reusable shopping bags started, I was just like, come on, really? I'm going to drag you really expect me to drag these things around everywhere I'm going? And now we've got a set of bags in both cars, and we've changed that habit completely. I'm seeing some grocery stores that are now using compostable bags for their produce sections, things like that. Those habits can change. I'm just one of those guys who needed to really be sort of pushed in that direction. I'm wondering what your impression is about Canadians at large and how open they are to change and sort of doing their part, if you will.
Well, I think your example is exactly the right one. This is what we found because the pressure was first on bags, and bags are a significant problem. Plastic bags, we use way too many of them. We throw way too many away. And as soon as stores started, and this often started with municipal bylaws saying you have to charge for bags. As soon as stores started to try to encourage people to bring reusable bags, it started happening. It became part of our habit, and people have embraced that largely. I know that Walmart did a pilot before phasing out plastic bags altogether this past year in southwestern Ontario, and they were quite surprised at how people embraced it. I think people are ready. We all recognize how much plastic waste goes through our lives every day. It piles up in our kitchens. It piles up in our bins, our garbage bins, and our recycling bins and bags. And so we recognize the problem. And what we need is, we can't change the world individually by ourselves, but we do recognize that systems that help us change our habits are really welcome and really helpful. So that's why we're saying to individual Canadians, if you are a bit discouraged by all this, and we hate to put out yet another bad news report about plastic, but if you are discouraged about this, really one of the most effective things you can do is talk to your local politicians, talk to your local member of parliament, of federal parliament, and say that you support bans, that you want to see them expanded, and that you would like to see more accessible, reusable options. And the second thing is, talk to your province about why they're not getting a very high micron plastic pollution, and really they need to focus on it. They need to get a handle on preventing waste before it becomes waste. Preventing plastic from becoming waste is really the goal for provinces.
Karen, really fascinating conversation. Really appreciate you being here today and giving us your insight on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to talk to you.
All right. Karen Wirsig is the Plastics Program Manager for the non-governmental organization Environmental Defence and spoke to us from Toronto.
Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI.TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI.TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.